The ground trembles under the weight of thousands of charging warriors, their battle cries tearing through the air like thunder. Dust rises in thick clouds as shields collide, swords flash, and the fate of empires hangs in the balance. This wasn't just combat, it was a brutal dance of survival where the wrong move meant annihilation. And at the heart of it all, weapons so devastating, so ingeniously designed for destruction, they could turn the tide of history in a single, bloody stroke. Imagine standing on that ancient battlefield, facing down a weapon you've never seen before, one that could slice through armor like parchment, or strike from terrifying distances with uncanny precision. These weren't just tools of war, they were masterpieces of terror, engineered to dominate, intimidate, and obliterate. From the deceptive simplicity of a sling to the horrifying complexity of a repeating crossbow, ancient civilizations poured their darkest ingenuity into crafting instruments of death that still send shivers down our spines today. What made these weapons so feared? Why did some fade into obscurity while others reshaped warfare forever? In this journey, we'll uncover the 25 most lethal arms ever forged by human hands, each with its own gruesome legacy. We'll explore how a single weapon could decide the rise or fall of a dynasty, how innovation and brutality walked hand in hand, and why, even centuries later, their designs still echo in modern warfare. This isn't just a list, it's a descent into the shadows of history where steel met flesh and the stakes were nothing short of survival, ready to meet the deadliest creations of the ancient world. Let's begin. Picture the terror of sailors in the 7th century, watching helplessly as an unstoppable wall of fire races across the waves toward their ships, flames that water only fed, not quenched. This was Greek fire, the Byzantine Empire's most closely guarded secret and the deadliest naval weapon of its age. A liquid nightmare spewed from bronze tubes mounted on warships, it clung to whatever it touched, burning so fiercely that victims plunged into the sea only to find the flames following them. The exact recipe vanished with the fall of Constantinople, but historians believe it combined crude petroleum, quicklime, and other volatile ingredients into a sticky, self-igniting inferno. What made Greek fire so revolutionary wasn't just its horrifying effectiveness, it was the psychological warfare it waged. Enemy fleets knew they couldn't outrun it or douse it, turning every naval engagement into a suicide mission. The Byzantines wielded it like a dragon's breath, decimating Arab invasions and saving their empire time and again. Its delivery system, the siphon, was equally ingenious, allowing crews to spray the fiery death in sweeping arcs or precise jets. Some accounts even describe handheld versions like ancient flamethrowers, used to clear enemy decks in close combat. Yet for all its power, Greek fire's greatest mystery isn't how it worked, but why its formula disappeared. The Byzantines guarded it with obsessive secrecy, knowing its value. Only a handful of artisans and generals knew the full recipe, and they took that knowledge to their graves. Modern scientists have tried for centuries to recreate it, but no replica matches the descriptions of a fire that burned on water, resisted sand or vinegar, and couldn't be smothered. Perhaps some ingredients, like those from long-lost mines, simply vanished from history. Or maybe the true formula was so dangerous that the Byzantines themselves buried it forever. One thing's certain, when Greek fire roared across the waves, it wasn't just a weapon, it was the wrath of an empire written in flame. Now imagine this, a rain of fire streaking across the night sky, turning the darkness into a hellish glow as flaming arrows thudded into wooden gates, thatched roofs, and enemy ranks. The flaming arrow wasn't just a weapon, it was primal terror distilled into a single burning shaft, used by civilizations from ancient China to medieval Europe to set the world ablaze. The concept was terrifyingly simple. Wrap oil-soaked cloth around an arrowhead, light it, and let it fly. But its effects were anything but basic. In sieges, these arrows transformed castles and fortresses into death traps, forcing defenders to choose between choking on smoke or exposing themselves to enemy fire while trying to douse the flames. The Huns, Mongols, and English longbowmen all mastered this deadly art, but its most devastating use might have been in naval battles where fire could cripple an entire fleet in minutes. What made flaming arrows uniquely horrifying wasn't just the destruction, it was the chaos. Unlike Greek fire, which required specialized equipment, any archer could turn their arrows into instruments of inferno with little more than pitch and a torch. Some armies even developed sophisticated variants. The Byzantines dipped arrows in quicklime, which ignited on contact with water, while Chinese strategists loaded them with gunpowder to create explosive projectiles centuries before cannons. But the true power of the flaming arrow lay in its psychological warfare. The sight of an incoming firestorm shattered morale, turning disciplined formations into panicked mobs. Fortresses designed to withstand battering rams and catapults became kindling in hours, their towering wooden walls collapsing into ash. Even when the flames missed, their glow betrayed enemy movements, leaving soldiers exposed under the eerie light of their own burning defenses. Yet for all its terror, the flaming arrow had brutal limitations. Wind could snuff it out mid-flight, rain rendered it useless, and the added weight reduced its range. Some cultures, like the Romans, dismissed it as unreliable until they faced enemies who proved just how wrong they were. Because in the right hands, this ancient weapon didn't just burn, it reshaped battlefields, forging victories from the ashes of everything it touched. The earth itself seemed to rebel as the ground shook under a weight no horse or man could match: thundering footsteps, splintering wood, and the panicked screams of soldiers realizing too late that no shield wall could stop what was coming. War elephants weren't just weapons, they were natural disasters on four legs, armored like fortresses and trained to turn battlefields into graveyards. Imagine standing in a phalanx when a 3-ton beast, its tusks fitted with iron spikes, its howdah bristling with archers, plowed into your ranks at 15 miles per hour. Bones shattered, men flew like rag dolls, and those who survived the charge faced the real nightmare. Elephants didn't just crush, they stomped, gored, and tossed victims with terrifying precision. Hannibal's crossing of the Alps with 37 African war elephants became legendary not just for its audacity, but for the psychological carnage these creatures unleashed on Rome's legions. At the Battle of Trebia, his elephants didn't merely break formations, they unmade them. Roman soldiers, drilled to face cavalry and infantry, had no playbook for monsters that trampled their comrades underfoot or seized men in their trunks to dash them against the ground. The stench of blood and fear turned disciplined units into fleeing mobs, but Hannibal wasn't the only one to harness this terror. Indian kingdoms like the Mauryas and Guptas fielded elephants by the hundreds, draping them in chainmail and plating their foreheads with steel to create living battering rams. What made war elephants so devastating wasn't just raw power, it was their unpredictability. A well-trained beast was a general's dream, but a panicked one became a weapon against its own side. Flaming arrows or spears to the eyes could send them into a berserk rage, spinning to crush friend and foe alike. That's why mahouts carried daggers and mallets to kill the animal if it turned, a grim necessity that underscored the gamble of fielding them. Yet when they worked, the results were apocalyptic. At the Battle of Hydaspes, Alexander the Great's forces faced King Porus's armored elephants and nearly met disaster. Even Macedonian sarissa pikes, designed to impale charging cavalry, barely slowed them. Veterans later wrote of men being lifted bodily and hurled into the dirt, or of elephants deliberately kneeling to grind wounded soldiers beneath their knees. Their reign as the ultimate battlefield weapon faded with the rise of gunpowder, but for over 2,000 years, war elephants were the closest thing to tanks the ancient world ever saw. They reshaped empires, turned the tide of wars, and left a legacy of awe and horror so profound that their silhouette still symbolizes raw, unstoppable power. To face one was to stare down nature itself, red in tooth, tusk, and iron. The sound of creaking wood and tensioning ropes would have sent defenders scrambling up castle walls, because nothing heralded destruction like the groan of a trebuchet preparing to unleash hell. This wasn't just a catapult, it was a masterpiece of medieval engineering, capable of hurling a 300-pound boulder over 800 feet with terrifying precision. While others relied on torsion or tension, the trebuchet tapped into the raw power of gravity and counterweight, turning simple physics into an earth-shattering weapon. At its heart lay a deceptively simple principle: leverage. A massive counterweight, often weighing several tons, was hoisted into the air while the throwing arm was winched down. When released, the weighted end plunged downward, whipping the longer arm upward with enough force to send projectiles crashing through fortress walls like paper. The genius wasn't just in the mechanics, it was in the adjustments. Engineers could tweak the counterweight's mass or the sling's length to change trajectory, turning the trebuchet into a terrifyingly precise tool. Some even had adjustable release mechanisms, allowing crews to dial in their shots like ancient artillerymen, but the real horror came from what it could throw. While stones were standard, besiegers got creative, decaying carcasses to spread disease, barrels of burning tar to ignite wooden defenses, even beehives or caustic lime to chaos behind enemy lines. During the siege of Stirling Castle in 1304, King Edward I's Warwolf trebuchet, the largest ever built, reportedly demolished entire sections of wall with a single shot, leaving the defenders no choice but surrender before it was even finished. What set the trebuchet apart was its psychological impact. Unlike battering rams or ladders, it struck from impossible distances, giving defenders no way to fight back. The whistle of an incoming projectile, followed by the crunch of shattered stone, became the soundtrack of sieges, eroding morale as surely as it did masonry. And unlike Greek fire or flaming arrows, it worked in any weather, rain, wind, or shine. Yet its brilliance was also its downfall. Trebuchets were massive, requiring days to assemble and teams of specialists to operate. As gunpowder weapons emerged, these lumbering giants became relics, but for centuries they were the ultimate siege breakers, a reminder that in warfare, sometimes the most devastating weapon isn't a blade or bullet, but the irresistible force of physics itself. The macuahuitl looked deceptively simple, a flat wooden paddle studded with jagged black glass, but in the hands of an Aztec warrior, it became one of the most horrifying close combat weapons ever devised. Imagine a sword that could slice through flesh and bone like a scalpel, yet shatter on impact with metal armor, designed not just to kill but to maim. Its edges glittered with razor-sharp obsidian blades, each shard fractured to a molecular edge sharper than modern surgical steel. Spanish conquistadors who faced it wrote of limbs lopped off in single strokes, horses beheaded mid-charge, and wounds that left victims bleeding out in seconds. What made the macuahuitl uniquely terrifying wasn't just its lethality, it was its duality. Unlike steel swords that bent or dulled, obsidian blades could be replaced after battle, making it a weapon of brutal efficiency. The Aztecs crafted it for maximum trauma. The wooden frame absorbed shock while the glass teeth sawed through tissue, creating jagged, irreparable injuries. But its true horror lay in its sacred role. For the Aztecs, warfare and religion intertwined, and the macuahuitl wasn't just a tool of conquest, it was an instrument of divine sacrifice. Warriors aimed not to kill quickly, but to wound and capture enemies alive for rituals atop temple pyramids. Spanish accounts describe the psychological toll of facing these weapons. The sight of sunlight glinting off obsidian teeth signaled not just death, but the looming threat of becoming an offering to the gods. Some conquistadors claimed the macuahuitl could decapitate a man in one swing, though modern tests suggest it likely required multiple strikes. Yet its reputation alone was enough to unnerve even armored soldiers, proving that fear could outmatch steel. No surviving examples exist today. Most were destroyed by the Spanish, but reconstructions reveal its chilling efficiency. A single macuahuitl strike could split a human skull or sever a limb, leaving wounds no battlefield surgeon could stitch. It was a weapon born from volcanic glass and sacred violence, embodying the Aztec belief that war was both a duty and a sacrament. To wield it was to serve the gods, and to face it was to stare into the jaws of a civilization that saw blood not as tragedy but as divine currency. No medieval archer could match the relentless rhythm of the khopesh, a weapon that turned the crossbow into the ancient world's first machine gun. With a simple push and pull motion, a skilled operator could unleash 10 armor-piercing bolts in under 15 seconds, creating a wall of death that shredded enemy formations. This wasn't just a weapon, it was a mechanical nightmare perfected over centuries to dominate battlefields from the Han Dynasty to the Ming. The genius lay in its magazine system. While European crossbows required agonizingly slow cranking, the khopesh fed bolts from a gravity-fed hopper mounted above the trigger. Each time the lever cycled forward, a new bolt dropped into place while the backward motion drew the string and fired. The result, a continuous hailstorm of fire that could mow down charging cavalry or suppress defenders on fortress walls. Chinese tacticians deployed them in staggered lines, creating overlapping kill zones where no attacker could advance without facing a bolt. But raw speed wasn't its only strength. The khopesh's compact design let soldiers fire from kneeling or prone positions, making them devastating ambush weapons. Armies stockpiled them by the thousands during the Three Kingdoms period. Entire units specialized in storm volleys, where hundreds of repeating crossbows would blacken the sky with bolts in synchronized salvos. The psychological effect was catastrophic. Enemies described the sound as like a swarm of locusts, knowing each metallic click meant another projectile seeking flesh. Yet this marvel had brutal trade-offs. Its short range, barely 50 yards, forced crews into lethal proximity with enemies. The lightweight bolts lacked the punch of European arbels bolts, often requiring poison-tipped heads to ensure kills. And while it excelled against unarmored foes, later dynasties abandoned it when gunpowder weapons arrived. Still, for over 1,000 years, the khopesh was the closest thing to automatic fire the ancient world ever saw, a reminder that innovation in warfare has always been measured in bodies piling up per second. What truly cemented its legend was its adaptability. Emperors issued miniature versions for palace guards, while peasant militias wielded crude but effective bamboo models. Even in its twilight, it found gruesome new life. Japanese ninjas adapted captured designs into handheld shuko crossbows for assassinations. The khopesh didn't just change battles. It proved that in the right hands, simplicity could outmatch complexity, and volume of fire could rewrite the rules of war. The khopesh wasn't just a sword, it was a revolution in Bronze Age warfare, combining the brutal efficiency of an axe with the precision of a blade. Picture a weapon so distinctive that its silhouette alone struck fear into enemies. A curved, sickle-like design with a sharpened outer edge and a hooked tip, wielded by the warriors of ancient Egypt like an extension of their own wrath. Unlike straight swords that relied on thrusting or hacking, the khopesh excelled at yanking shields aside with its curve before following through with a slashing blow that could sever limbs or crush skulls in a single motion. What made this weapon so devastating was its versatility. The curved blade allowed fighters to exploit gaps in armor, using the hook to disarm opponents or pull them off balance. The weight distribution, heavier near the tip, gave each swing crushing momentum, while the sharpened edge could slice through flesh with terrifying ease. Archaeologists have found khopesh blades with serrated edges, suggesting some were designed to maximize trauma, leaving wounds that wouldn't easily heal. But its brilliance wasn't just in combat. The khopesh was a symbol of royal authority, often depicted in the hands of pharaohs smiting enemies in temple carvings. It blurred the line between weapon and sacred artifact, a tool of both war and divine justice. Surviving examples reveal meticulous craftsmanship, with some hilts inlaid with ivory or gold, reserved for elite warriors and nobility. Yet its practicality kept it in use for centuries, from the Hyksos invasions to the height of the New Kingdom. Even the legendary Ramses II was buried with a khopesh, a testament to its prestige. But the khopesh's legacy goes beyond Egypt. Scholars believe its design influenced later weapons like the Greek kopes and even the medieval falchion. Its curved geometry was so effective that modern chefs' knives echo its shape, unwitting descendants of a weapon born to conquer. To hold a khopesh was to wield the innovation of an empire that understood one brutal truth: in battle, form follows function, and sometimes the deadliest tools are those that bend. The deafening twang of sinew ropes unwinding signaled death from a distance no bow could match. The ballista, Rome's answer to turning entire battlefields into killing fields. This wasn't just a scaled-up crossbow. It was a masterpiece of torsion engineering, harnessing the power of twisted animal sinew to launch iron-tipped bolts with enough force to impale 3 men in a single shot. Imagine a weapon so precise it could pick off a single enemy commander at 200 yards, yet so devastating it pinned charging cavalry to the earth like grotesque trophies. What set the ballista apart was its brutal elegance. 2 massive wooden arms, each wound with coiled sinew bundles, acted like springs. When cranked back and released, they snapped forward with terrifying speed, propelling a 5-foot bolt straight as a laser. Roman engineers refined it to near perfection. Adjustable tension screws allowed crews to dial in range and power, while the slider system minimized friction for pinpoint accuracy. Unlike trebuchets that lobbed indiscriminate stones, the ballista was the sniper rifle of antiquity, capable of threading shots through shield gaps or smashing through wooden palisades like a modern anti-material round. But its real genius lay in versatility. Loaded with bolts, it became an anti-personnel nightmare, cutting down ranks with mechanical efficiency. Swapping to spherical shot turned it into a makeshift cannon, raining down fist-sized stones to shatter morale. Naval variants mounted on triremes could punch through enemy hulls below the waterline, dooming ships before they closed for boarding. Julius Caesar famously deployed them during his invasion of Britain, using their range to pick off charioteers who thought themselves safely out of arrow reach. The psychological impact was as calculated as the engineering. Legionaries spoke of enemies freezing mid-charge at the distinctive thrum of a ballista volley, knowing what followed wasn't the chaos of battle, but the cold certainty of a machine that never missed. Yet for all its power, the ballista had one flaw. It was a diva of war. Rain loosened its sinew springs, humidity ruined torsion balance, and reassembling its complex frame mid-battle was impossible. When gunpowder arrived, these painstakingly crafted monsters vanished, but not before proving that long before smart weapons, Rome had already invented the art of scientific slaughter. Perhaps its most chilling legacy, the ballista didn't just kill, it demonstrated. Each perfectly placed bolt was a message, resistance was geometry, and Rome had solved the equation. In the hands of a Viking warrior, the Ulfberht sword wasn't just a weapon. It was a technological marvel centuries ahead of its time. Picture this, a blade so pure, so resilient, it could bend at a 90-degree angle and snap back without breaking, while lesser swords shattered like glass under the same stress. Forged between the 9th and 11th centuries, these legendary weapons bore the mysterious inscription, plus Ulfberht plus T, a mark that signaled unmatched craftsmanship in an era when most European swords were brittle, slag-riddled death traps. What set the Ulfberht apart was its steel. While contemporaries struggled with low-quality iron ore, Ulfberht blades contained crucible steel with a carbon content rivaling modern high-grade alloys, a feat thought impossible until the Industrial Revolution. This wasn't just superior metallurgy, it was alchemy. The steel's purity allowed the swords to be lighter, sharper, and far more durable, capable of cleaving through armor and bone without losing their edge. Archaeologists have found Ulfberts in riverbeds after 1,000 years, their inscriptions still legible, their blades uncorroded, ghostly echoes of a lost art. But the real mystery isn't just how they were made, but where. The closest known source of such high-quality steel was in Central Asia, along trade routes Vikings shouldn't have accessed. Some theories suggest Norsemen traded with the Islamic world, bypassing feudal Europe's technological stagnation. Others propose a secret network of master smiths guarding their techniques like state secrets. Either way, owning an Ulfberht wasn't just about combat, it was about prestige. These swords were the Viking equivalent of a supercar, passed down through generations and often buried with chieftains as symbols of power. Battlefield accounts hint at their terrifying effectiveness. While most warriors relied on axes or spears, an Ulfberht-wielding berserker could dominate a skirmish, striking faster and recovering quicker than opponents weighed down by inferior blades. Its tapered design allowed both slashing and thrusting, a versatility that left enemies guessing. Even the sword's balance was engineered for lethality, with a center of gravity near the hilt for lightning-fast redirection, a detail modern fencing masters still admire. Yet for all their advantages, Ulfberts were vanishingly rare. Only around 170 have been found, suggesting they were reserved for elites or lucky raiders who plundered them. Their decline remains as enigmatic as their origin. Did the trade routes dry up? Were the smiths wiped out in wars? Whatever the case, these swords didn't just outclass contemporaries, they defied the limits of their age, proving that even in the Dark Ages, brilliance could flash like steel in the right hands. The sky itself seemed to scream as hundreds of fire-tailed projectiles arced downward, turning the battlefield into a nightmare of piercing death and flame. This was the H-Wacha, a 15th-century Korean weapon so advanced it could outgun entire regiments in seconds. Picture a wooden cart crowned with rows of iron tubes, each packed with gunpowder-propelled arrows capable of blanketing an area the size of a soccer field with razor-sharp rain. Unlike European cannons that fired single heavy shots, the H-Wacha was the ancient world's closest equivalent to a cluster bomb, unleashing sheer volume of fire that left no room to dodge or hide. What made this weapon revolutionary was its hybrid design. By combining China's gunpowder technology with Korea's precision engineering, inventors created a system where a single ignition could launch up to 200 Singaijin arrows tipped with incendiary charges or poison. The secret lay in the launcher's fire lane mechanism. Gunners lit a central fuse that snaked through each tube, ensuring near-simultaneous ignition. Historical records from the Imjin Wars describe Japanese samurai, accustomed to honorable single combat, frozen in horror as entire formations were erased before they could draw their katana. But brute force wasn't its only strength. H-Wachas were mobile, mounted on two-wheeled carts that could be repositioned mid-battle. Crews could adjust launch angles to strike targets at different ranges, some variants even firing specialized anti-cavalry arrows with hooked heads to tangle in horses' legs. King Sejong's military manuals detailed chillingly methodical deployments, H-Wacha batteries placed in staggered lines to create overlapping kill zones, their arrows timed to ignite after impact, burning through supplies and morale alike. Yet the H-Wacha's brilliance was shadowed by fragility. Wet weather could ruin its gunpowder, and reloading took precious minutes under fire. But when conditions aligned, the effect was apocalyptic. During the siege of Hingju in 1593, just 40 H-Wacha repelled 30,000 Japanese troops, their arrows slicing through bamboo armor like parchment. Modern tests show these projectiles could penetrate 3 inches of wood at 100 yards, a terrifying punch for an era before rifled barrels. The weapon's legacy outlived its use. Some historians argue it delayed Japan's conquest of Korea by decades, while others see it as a precursor to modern missile artillery. but perhaps its most enduring lesson was psychological. The H-Watcher didn't just kill, it reshaped warfare's very soul, proving that sometimes the deadliest weapon isn't the one that strikes hardest, but the one that leaves enemies too stunned to fight back. With a blade that seemed to dance in the sunlight, the scimitar was more than just a sword. It was the soul of Middle Eastern warfare, forged in the crucible of desert winds and horseback combat. Unlike the straight-edged blades of Europe that relied on thrusting, the scimitar's elegant curve was engineered for one brutal purpose: to deliver devastating, fluid slashes that could sever limbs or open arteries with a single whip-like motion. This wasn't just a weapon, it was an extension of the horseman's arm, designed to strike with relentless efficiency at full gallop, leaving a trail of carnage in its wake. What made the scimitar so lethal was its marriage of form and function. The curve concentrated force into a narrower contact point, allowing the blade to slice deeply even with lighter swings, a critical advantage for cavalry who needed to conserve energy during prolonged charges. Historical accounts from the Crusades describe knights dumbfounded by the scimitar's ability to bypass their shield defenses, its arc hooking around edges to strike lethal blows. The Mamluks and Seljuks wielded it with terrifying precision, often pairing it with a small shield or dagger for close-quarters savagery, but its brilliance wasn't just in combat. The scimitar's balance made it a masterwork of metallurgy, its tip slightly weighted to enhance slashing momentum without sacrificing control. Yet the scimitar's true power lay in its symbolism. In Islamic cultures, it became a sacred emblem of justice and authority, often inscribed with Quranic verses or the names of caliphs. The legendary sword Zulfiqar, said to be wielded by Ali, the Prophet Muhammad's cousin, was depicted as a double-pointed scimitar, a divine weapon that split shields like parchment. Even the sword's curve held meaning, echoing the crescent moon that adorned flags and minarets. But don't mistake symbolism for fragility. When the Ottomans stormed Constantinople, it was scimitars that cleared the walls, their curved blades flickering like silver lightning through Byzantine ranks. Later, Napoleonic officers facing Mamluk cavalry wrote home in shock about swords that could cut a man in half from shoulder to hip with a single backhanded stroke. Modern tests reveal why. A well-forged scimitar could achieve a cutting angle of up to 45 degrees, turning even a glancing blow into a mortal wound. The scimitar's legacy endures not just in museums, but in the DNA of modern blades. From the Indian talwar to the Persian shamshir, its influence rippled across continents, proving that a weapon born in the sands could conquer the world. To hold one was to grasp the artistry of violence, a reminder that sometimes the deadliest tools are those that move like the wind they were forged in. The pilum wasn't just a javelin, it was a meticulously engineered wrecking ball disguised as a spear, designed to sabotage enemy defenses before the first sword even clashed. Picture a Roman legionary, muscles coiled, hurling this 6-foot iron-tipped missile with enough force to punch through a shield, only for the weapon's secret feature to activate on impact. The slender iron shank would bend, its tip twisting into a hooked catastrophe that rendered the shield unusable, while the wooden shaft dragged downward like an anchor, forcing the enemy to abandon their protection or fight unbalanced. This wasn't just ranged combat, it was psychological warfare disguised as physics. What made the pilum so devastating was its calculated imperfection. Unlike Celt or Greek spears built for reuse, Roman smiths intentionally tempered only the tip and base of the iron shank, leaving the middle section soft. On impact, this weak point would buckle, ensuring the weapon couldn't be thrown back, but not before its barbed tip lodged deep in shields or flesh. Historical accounts describe Celtic warriors frantically trying to dislodge pila mid-charge, their shield arms sagging under the deadweight, their formations unraveling into chaos. And that was the legion's cue. With enemies now exposed, disciplined ranks of gladius-wielding soldiers would advance, turning what should have been a melee into a slaughter. But the genius didn't stop at bending metal. The pilum's pyramidal tip could pierce chainmail, while its length, roughly half the height of a man, allowed volleys to be thrown in tight unison, creating a lethal rain no shield wall could fully block. Julius Caesar's writings reveal how Pila turned the tide at Alesia, where Gaulish chargers found themselves crippled under a hail of these shield killers before Roman short swords finished the job. Yet for all its lethality, the pilum was a logistical dream. Its modular design, iron shank socketed into a wooden shaft, meant broken pieces could be swapped in field forges, and its lightweight construction let legionaries carry two without sacrificing mobility. Even its aerodynamics were fine-tuned. Tests show a well-thrown pilum could maintain deadly accuracy at 30 yards, spinning just enough to stabilize mid-flight like a quarterback's perfect spiral. The weapon's legacy outlasted Rome itself. Byzantine armies adapted its principles into shorter angons, and modern engineers still study its bending mechanism for insights into controlled metal failure. But perhaps its greatest tribute came from enemies' Celtic chieftains who began strapping spare shields to their backs, not for extra protection, but because they knew one pilum strike could turn their primary defense into a liability. In the hands of Rome's legions, this unassuming javelin didn't just win battles. It rewrote the rules of engagement, proving that sometimes the deadliest weapon is the one that disarms before the first blow is even struck. The atlatl wasn't just a tool, it was humanity's first attempt to cheat physics, a simple wooden lever that transformed a spear into a hypersonic missile. Picture this, a hunter standing at the edge of a prehistoric forest, gripping a 2-foot-long device with a hook at one end. With a flick of the wrist, the atlatl acts like an extension of the arm, whipping a 6-foot dart forward with enough force to pierce a mammoth's hide from 70 yards away. This wasn't just an upgrade, it was a revolution in killing range, allowing our ancestors to strike from distances that claws and fangs couldn't match. The secret lay in its biomechanical brilliance. By adding just 12 inches to the throwing arm's leverage, the atlatl amplified speed exponentially. Modern tests show darts launched this way hit speeds over 90 miles per hour, comparable to an arrow from a recurve bow. But unlike bows, which require years of training, the atlatl could be mastered in weeks, making it the great equalizer of early warfare. The Aztecs called it the tlacochtli, and Spanish conquistadors quickly learned to fear its armor-piercing sting. Hernán Cortés's men reported obsidian-tipped darts punching through steel breastplates, leaving wounds that festered from embedded shards. What made the atlatl uniquely terrifying was its versatility. Hunters could adjust the throwing arc for silent, low-trajectory shots or rain death from above in sieges. Some cultures weighted their atlatls with carved stones, adding rotational spin for deadly accuracy. Archaeologists have found specimens adorned with animal effigies, perhaps spiritual aids for guiding projectiles to their mark. But its true legacy was tactical. Neolithic battlegrounds shifted when one side could launch volleys from outside retaliation range, turning skirmishes into one-sided slaughters. The weapon's decline came only when bows achieved similar range with faster reloads. Yet even in obsolescence, it left an indelible mark. Modern engineers still study its physics, and survivalists relearn its techniques, proving that sometimes the oldest solutions are the most brutally elegant. To hold an atlatl was to wield the first true long-range weapon, a reminder that human ingenuity in violence is as ancient as we are. The naginata wasn't just a weapon, it was a revolution in reach and versatility, a blade on a pole that turned its wielder into a whirlwind of slashing fury. Picture this, a curved, single-edged sword blade mounted on a 6-foot wooden shaft, combining the cutting power of a katana with the extended range of a spear. In the hands of a skilled warrior, it became a blur of motion, capable of decapitating a horse with one swing or piercing through armor with a precise thrust. What made it truly terrifying was its adaptability, equally deadly in open battle or confined spaces. wielded by samurai, warrior monks, and even women trained to defend their homes. Unlike the katana, which demanded close quarters engagement, the naginata allowed fighters to control the battlefield from a distance. Its length gave it dominance over swords, enabling users to strike first and retreat before an opponent could close the gap. The blade's curvature ensured deep, cleaving wounds, while the shaft could block or disarm with brutal efficiency. Historical scrolls depict naginata wielding monks of the Sohei cleaving through mounted samurai, hooking riders from their saddles with the weapon's wicked reverse stroke. Even the legendary Tomo Gozen, one of Japan's few female warriors, was said to have wielded a naginata with such skill that she beheaded enemies mid-charge. But its brilliance extended beyond raw combat. The naginata's design evolved for psychological warfare. The metallic shing of its blade ringing through the air became a sound feared on medieval battlefields. Its presence forced enemies to recalculate every advance, knowing one misstep could mean losing a limb. Warrior monks exploited this fear, using naginata formations to funnel attackers into kill zones, where the weapon's sweeping arcs turned cramped temple stairs into death traps. Even in peacetime, the naginata endured. It became a symbol of discipline and grace, central to women's self-defense training in feudal Japan. The naginata jutsu schools refined its techniques into an art form, emphasizing fluid, circular motions that could disable multiple opponents without exhausting the wielder. Modern tests show a properly balanced naginata can change direction mid-swing with terrifying speed, its blade arriving faster than the eye can track. What sealed its legacy was its refusal to fade into obsolescence. When firearms arrived in Japan, the naginata adapted. Shorter versions became sidearms for gunners, proving that even in the age of gunpowder, some weapons earned their place through sheer, unrelenting utility. To face a naginata was to face the perfect marriage of reach and precision, a reminder that sometimes the deadliest weapons are those that give no quarter, near or far. The falx wasn't just a sword, it was a curve of pure terror. A blade so brutally effective it forced the might of Rome to kneel and rethink its entire approach to armor. Picture a weapon that defied the logic of straight-edged combat, a forward-curving sickle of iron sharpened along its inner edge, designed to hook around shields and crash downward with enough force to split helmets and the skulls beneath them like overripe melons. This was the signature weapon of the Dacians, a tribal people who carved their legend into Roman history not through numbers but through sheer, horrifying ingenuity. What made the falx so devastating was its geometry. Unlike the gladius, which relied on thrusting and short chops, the falx acted like a combination of axe and grappling hook. Its curve concentrated force into a single, downward-cutting motion, allowing it to bypass the rectangular scutum shields of Roman legionaries. Historical accounts from Trajan's Dacian wars describe soldiers with their hands severed at the wrist, their shield arms suddenly useless as the falx's tip whipped around their defenses. Even worse were the wounds to the head. The blade's arc could strike the crown of a helmet with such force that it crumpled metal inward, crushing bone beneath. Rome's response to this nightmare was unprecedented. For the first time, the empire modified its iconic armor, reinforcing helmets with crossbars, the cross-bracing visible in later imperial designs, to prevent the falx from cleaving through. Legionaries stationed in Dacia were issued thicker, segmented arm guards and even adopted a new type of greave to protect their lead legs from sweeping cuts. Trajan's column, the monumental frieze celebrating his victory, subtly betrays the weapon's psychological impact. Dacian warriors are depicted wielding the falx with almost supernatural menace, their blades frozen mid-swing as if the sculptor himself feared their stroke. But the falx's lethality went beyond brute force. Its versatility allowed it to slash, hook, and even pierce when reversed, making it unpredictable in close combat. The Dacians wielded it with both one- and two-handed grips. The longer falx maya could reach over shield walls to strike at exposed necks, while the shorter version became a whirlwind of death in tight formations. Modern reconstructions show the weapon could generate over 300 pounds of pressure on impact, enough to shear through mail rings or lodge deep in wood, forcing opponents to abandon their shields. Yet for all its terror, the Falx was a double-edged gamble, literally. Its design left users vulnerable during recovery swings, and its specialized shape demanded immense skill. When Rome finally crushed Dacia, the weapon faded into obscurity, though its influence lingered in the curved blades of later cultures. The Falx didn't just challenge Rome's soldiers, it challenged their very concept of invincibility, proving that sometimes the most dangerous weapons aren't the most advanced, just the ones that force empires to question everything they thought they knew about war. The Zhua looked like something ripped from a nightmare, a long metal pole tipped with 4 curved claws, each sharpened to a razor's edge, designed to snatch weapons from enemy hands or rip flesh from bone with a single yank. Imagine facing this monstrous contraption in battle. One moment you're gripping your sword, the next, a hooked claw has wrenched it from your grasp, leaving you defenseless as the attacker steps in to finish the job. This wasn't just a weapon, it was psychological warfare forged in iron, a tool so unsettling that even seasoned warriors hesitated before crossing its path. What made the Zhua so uniquely terrifying was its dual purpose. The curved claws could disarm opponents with terrifying efficiency, hooking blades, spears, or even shields, twisting them aside with brutal leverage. But disarmament was just the beginning. Once a defender was exposed, the same claws could slash downward, tearing through armor like a bear's swipe. Historical manuals from the Ming Dynasty depict fighters using the Zhua to pull riders from horseback or snatch enemies by the limbs, dragging them into waiting blades. Some variants even featured spiked knuckles along the shaft, turning the weapon into a close-quarters nightmare if opponents dared to rush inside its reach. The psychological impact was calculated. Unlike straightforward blades, the Zhua's very appearance disrupted an enemy's focus. Its unnatural design forced fighters to second-guess their movements should they attack, guard their weapon, or brace for a disemboweling pull. Chinese strategists noted how entire formations would stall when Zhua wielders advanced, their presence sowing confusion more effectively than a volley of arrows. And in one-on-one combat, the weapon's versatility became a gruesome advantage. A skilled user could trap an enemy's arm mid-swing, rotate the shaft, and dislocate a shoulder with a single motion, leaving victims crippled before the real slaughter began. Yet the Zhua's brilliance came with steep trade-offs. Mastering it required years of training, as its unconventional mechanics defied traditional spear or staff techniques. In tight formations, its sweeping arcs risked entangling allies, making it a weapon best suited for skirmishes or solo combat. And while it excelled against lightly armored foes, heavier plate could sometimes resist its hooks. Still, when wielded by experts, the Zhua was more than a tool, it was theater. The sound of metal screeching against metal as it wrenched swords away, the sight of bloodied claws retracting for another strike. These were the moments that turned battles before a single fatal blow landed. Perhaps its greatest legacy was its influence. Later dynasties adapted its principles into hook swords and other hybrid weapons, while European accounts of Chinese clawmen fueled exotic legends. But the original Zhua remains a testament to ancient ingenuity, proof that sometimes the deadliest weapons aren't the ones that kill the fastest, but the ones that make enemies question whether they should fight at all. The khopesh wasn't just a sword, it was a cruel geometry lesson, a curved blade designed to defy every instinct about how combat should unfold. Picture a weapon that ignored the rules of engagement, a double-edged sickle with a near semicircular bend, its tip tapering to a needle point, forged to snake around shields and stab into the soft, unprotected flesh behind them. For warriors of the Ethiopian highlands, this wasn't just a tool of war. It was the great equalizer, turning defensive formations into death traps and leaving even the most armored opponents vulnerable. What set the khopesh apart was its unholy versatility. Unlike straight swords that clashed directly with shields, the khopesh radical curve allowed fighters to hook over or around defenses, striking downward at collarbones, kidneys, or thighs with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. Historical accounts describe Abyssinian warriors using it to grapple opponents, yanking shields aside with the blade's inside curve before reversing the motion to slash across exposed throats. The sheer unpredictability of its angles made it a duelist's nightmare. A skilled wielder could deliver thrusts from seemingly impossible directions, bypassing guards that would stop conventional weapons cold. But the khopesh's brilliance wasn't just in offense. Its curvature also made it a surprisingly effective parrying tool, capable of trapping enemy blades mid-swing and redirecting their momentum. Some variants featured a secondary backward bend near the hilt, allowing for lightning-fast recovery after a missed strike. The weapon's design was so optimized for close-quarters lethality that even the Romans, masters of shield warfare, would have struggled to counter it had they ever faced it in battle. The psychological impact was just as calculated. In the hands of Ethiopian nobility, the khopesh became a symbol of status, its gleaming blade often inscribed with Coptic crosses or intricate geometric patterns. But on the battlefield, its true artistry was in terror. Imagine a formation of soldiers bracing behind their shields, only to see enemy warriors flick their wrists and send curved steel snaking toward their unguarded backs. It was a weapon that turned the very concept of defense into a liability, forcing enemies to abandon tried and true tactics or risk bleeding out from wounds they never saw coming. Yet mastering the khopesh demanded brutal discipline. Its unconventional shape required entirely new muscle memory, with techniques emphasizing wrist flicks and rotational strikes rather than traditional slashes. Training manuals from the Gandharan period depict fighters practicing with wooden replicas for years before being deemed worthy of steel. But for those who persevered, the payoff was unparalleled, a weapon that didn't just meet an opponent's defenses but laughed at them. Modern recreations prove its horrifying efficiency. A well-placed khopesh thrust can pierce leather armor as easily as cloth, while its slashing motions leave wounds that gape open like grotesque smiles. Even today, the khopesh's legacy endures in Ethiopian martial arts, a reminder that sometimes the deadliest weapons aren't the ones that follow the rules but the ones that rewrite them entirely. The Morning Star wasn't just a mace, it was medieval Europe's answer to armored knights who thought themselves invincible. Picture a solid metal sphere studded with jagged spikes, mounted on a wooden or chain-linked handle, swinging with enough force to turn even the finest plate armor into a death trap. Unlike swords that glanced off steel or axes that struggled to find weak points, the Morning Star crushed through defenses, its spikes concentrating energy into tiny, armor-piercing points that dented, shattered, or punched straight through metal like a blacksmith's hammer meeting tin. What made this weapon so brutally effective was its physics. A well-forged Morning Star could deliver over 1,000 pounds of pressure per square inch on impact, enough to fracture ribs beneath breastplates or send shockwaves through helmets that left knights dazed and bleeding from their ears. Historical accounts from the 100 Years' War describe French men-at-arms collapsing under its blows, their ornate armor crumpling inward like crushed cans. At the Battle of Agincourt, English foot soldiers wielded Morning Stars to devastating effect against dismounted French nobility, exploiting the weapon's ability to stagger opponents with single strikes, leaving them vulnerable to finishing blows. But the Morning Star's true genius lay in its adaptability. Some versions featured flanged edges for slicing, while others had spiked chains linking the head to the handle, adding a whipping motion that increased velocity and carnage. Swiss mercenaries favored this variant, using the chain's flexibility to strike around shields or entangle limbs before yanking enemies off balance. The weapon's very design played on terror. The sight of a spiked orb whistling through the air was often enough to break formations, as no amount of armor could fully dull the trauma of repeated blunt force impacts. Yet the Morning Star wasn't without risks. Its weight demanded immense strength, and a mistimed swing could leave the wielder exposed. Still, for knights and common soldiers alike, it became the great equalizer. When swords faltered and arrows bounced away, the Morning Star persisted, proof that sometimes the simplest solutions are the most horrifying. To face one was to learn a hard lesson. Armor wasn't safety, just a slower death sentence. The halberd didn't just dominate Renaissance battlefields, it rewrote the rules of engagement, combining the brute force of an axe, the piercing precision of a spear, and the tactical versatility of a hook into a single, nightmarish package. Picture a 6-foot shaft of polished ash, crowned with a steel head that looked like the love child of a lumberjack's tool and a knight's nightmare. On one side, a razor-edged axe blade capable of cleaving through armor plate. On the other, a vicious spike for thrusting, and above it all, a recurved hook designed to yank horsemen from their saddles like fish plucked from a stream. This wasn't just a weapon, it was a Swiss-engineered symphony of violence. What made the halberd revolutionary was its adaptability. Against charging cavalry, the hook could snatch riders by the belt or limb, dragging them down to be finished by the axe. In tight infantry formations, the spear tip kept enemies at bay, while the axe head delivered downward chops that shattered shields and skulls alike. The Swiss, masters of disciplined pike squares, quickly realized the halberd's potential as a force multiplier. At the Battle of Morgarten in 1315, a small Swiss force wielding halberds ambushed an Austrian cavalry column in a mountain pass, using the weapon's hooks to unseat armored knights before butchering them in the mud. But the halberd's brilliance wasn't just in its design, it was in its economy. Unlike expensive swords that required years of training, the halberd could be mastered in months, making it the perfect weapon for peasant levies and professional soldiers alike. Its long shaft gave reach, while the weighted head added crushing momentum, allowing even novice fighters to generate terrifying force. Some variants featured a langet, a metal strip running partway down the shaft to prevent enemy blades from severing it mid-swing. Others had flanged edges on the axe head to punch through chainmail with ease. The psychological impact was undeniable. When Swiss mercenary squares advanced, their halberds flashing in the sun, even the most seasoned armies hesitated. The weapon's sheer presence disrupted traditional battlefield tactics, forcing opponents to rethink cavalry charges and close formations. At Nancy in 1477, Swiss halberdiers surrounded and killed Charles the Bold of Burgundy, their hooks preventing his escape as the axe heads finished the job. The message was clear. In the hands of disciplined troops, the halberd didn't just level the playing field, it tilted it violently in their favor. Yet the halberd wasn't invincible. Its length made it unwieldy in chaotic skirmishes, and the specialized techniques required to exploit its full potential took drilling. But when wielded en masse, it became a wall of moving death. Modern historians studying Renaissance battlefields have found halberd wounds on skeletons, deep clefts in shoulder bones, puncture marks from thrusts that pierced rib cages, and even vertebrae split clean in two. Its influence outlasted the Renaissance, evolving into the partisan and spontoons carried by officers in later centuries. But the original halberd remains a testament to Swiss ingenuity, proof that sometimes the deadliest weapons aren't the flashiest, but the ones that turn every possible advantage into a single, unstoppable stroke. The nunchaku's rhythmic click-clack might echo through pop culture as the weapon of choice for flashy martial artists, but its true history is far more brutal and humbler than Hollywood suggests. Born not in the hands of warrior monks but in the calloused grip of Okinawan farmers, this deceptively simple tool began life as a rice flail, used to thresh grain by beating stalks loose from their husks. Yet when Japan's Satsuma clan banned weapons in Okinawa during the 17th century, ingenuity turned agriculture into artistry, and the nunchaku became a stealthy instrument of rebellion. What transformed this humble tool into a lethal weapon was physics. The two wooden shafts, connected by a short cord or chain, could generate terrifying speed when spun, up to 20 miles per hour at the tip, delivering strikes with the kinetic force of a hammer blow. But the real danger lay in unpredictability. Unlike swords or spears that moved linearly, the nunchaku's whipping arcs made it nearly impossible to block, capable of striking around shields or deflecting incoming attacks with a flick of the wrist. Masters like Tara Shinken developed techniques to exploit this, using one stick to trap an opponent's weapon while the other snapped forward to crush windpipes or shatter wrists. Yet the nunchaku's deadliest secret wasn't its offensive power, it was concealment. Easy to disassemble and hide, farmers could carry the separate pieces innocently, reassembling them in seconds when threatened. Some variants even doubled as climbing tools, their cords sturdy enough to scale walls, making them the perfect guerrilla weapon. And contrary to myth, Okinawan practitioners rarely used paired nunchaku. Single flails were preferred for control, leaving the other hand free to grapple or counterstrike. Modern misconceptions overshadow its brutal practicality. Bruce Lee's cinematic spins, while dazzling, were showmanship. Real nunchakujutsu emphasizes tight, controlled strikes to vital points, knees, elbows, and the brachial plexus to disable opponents instantly. Training focused not on flourishes but on muscle memory to avoid the weapon's notorious rebound. A mistimed swing could crack the user's skull as easily as an enemy's. The nunchaku's legacy endures not in war but in discipline. Banned in several countries for its potential lethality, it remains a symbol of adaptability, proof that oppression sparks innovation, and even the simplest tools can become instruments of defiance when wielded with enough cunning and rage. The sarissa didn't just dominate battlefields, it stretched the very limits of ancient warfare. A spear so absurdly long it turned infantry into an unstoppable wall of bristling steel. Picture a pike stretching 18 feet into the air, its iron tip glinting menacingly while its butt spike anchored firmly in the dirt, wielded by the tightly packed ranks of Alexander the Great's phalanx. This wasn't just a weapon, it was a revolution in reach, allowing Macedonian warriors to skewer enemies long before their shorter swords or spears could even get close. What made the sarissa so devastating was its role in the phalanx formation. Each soldier carried one angled forward, creating a staggered forest of spear points that no enemy could penetrate without being impaled 5 times over. The first 5 rows of pikes extended beyond the front line, meaning even charging cavalry faced a lethal thicket before reaching the men holding them. At the Battle of Gaugamela, this tactic shattered Persian forces, their chariots and cavalry floundering against what seemed like an impassable metal hedge. The sarissa's length neutralized traditional infantry advantages, forcing opponents to either retreat or be systematically gutted as the phalanx advanced like a human threshing machine. But raw reach came with brutal trade-offs. The sarissa's weight, up to 12 pounds, demanded immense upper body strength, and its length made it unwieldy in chaotic skirmishes or uneven terrain. If an enemy broke through the pike line, the formation collapsed into chaos, as sarissa wielders had no sidearms beyond a short dagger. Alexander's genius lay in mitigating these flaws, using cavalry to protect the phalanx's flanks and ensuring the terrain favored his walking fortress of spears. Yet the sarissa's legacy wasn't just tactical, it was psychological. The sight of those endless pikes advancing in lockstep broke morale before combat even began. Opponents described the sound of thousands of sarissas clattering into position as the groan of an iron giant waking, a harbinger of inevitable slaughter. Modern reconstructions reveal the terror firsthand. Even disciplined volunteers flinch when faced with a wall of bristling points, their instincts screaming at them to flee rather than charge into certain impalement. For all its dominance, the sarissa's reign was short-lived. After Alexander, successors struggled to replicate his tactical brilliance, and more flexible Roman legions eventually exploited its rigidity. Yet for one glorious moment in history, this absurdly long spear didn't just win battles, it redefined how wars were fought, proving that sometimes the deadliest weapon is the one that keeps enemies forever out of reach. The man-catcher wasn't designed to kill, it was engineered to humiliate, a spiked metal claw on a pole that turned armored knights into helpless prey. Picture this, a 10-foot shaft topped with a semicircular collar lined with inward-facing barbs, wielded by guards or mercenaries tasked with taking high-value targets alive. One well-placed thrust could snag a knight by the neck, limbs, or breastplate, yanking them off horseback or immobilizing them in a grip that tightened with every struggle. This wasn't just a weapon, it was a brutal combination of shepherd's crook and bear trap, refined to exploit the very armor meant to protect its wearer. What made the man-catcher so diabolical was its precision. Unlike axes or maces that relied on brute force, this tool required finesse, aiming for gaps in plate armor at the throat or joints where the barbed prongs could latch without killing. The spikes weren't meant to pierce deeply, they were angled to hold, ensuring nobles could be captured for ransom rather than slaughtered. Historical accounts from the 30 Years' War describe panicked knights flailing like fish on a line, their polished armor suddenly a cage as the man-catcher's prongs dug into their gorget or pinned their arms to their sides. But the real genius lay in its psychological warfare. For knights trained to duel with honor, being subdued like livestock was worse than death. The mere sight of these devices on a battlefield could deter charges, as no amount of martial skill could counter a weapon designed to bypass combat entirely. City guards and bounty hunters adapted smaller versions for crowd control, using them to drag troublemakers through streets without spilling a drop of blood, at least not fatally. Some variants featured hinged collars that snapped shut like scissors, while others had weighted cords to entangle limbs mid-swing. Yet the man-catcher's elegance hid grim trade-offs. Misjudge an angle and the target could wrench free or turn the pole against its wielder. Against unarmored foes, it was nearly useless, its barbs lacked the bite to grip cloth or leather. But in the right context, it was the ultimate equalizer, a tool that proved sometimes the most dangerous weapons aren't those that kill, but those that strip warriors of their dignity, one spiked embrace at a time. The fire lance didn't just herald the age of gunpowder, it became the age of gunpowder, a terrifying hybrid of spear and flame that turned medieval battlefields into scenes from a pyromaniac's dream. Picture this, a bamboo or metal tube strapped to the end of a 9-foot pole, packed with a volatile mix of saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal. When ignited, it erupted in a jet of fire and shrapnel, scorching enemies at close range while still leaving a sharpened point to impale any survivors. This wasn't just a weapon, it was the violent birth of handheld explosives, a bridge between the ancient world of melee combat and the coming storm of firearms. What set the fire lance apart was its raw, improvisational terror. Early versions, dating back to 10th century China, were essentially flamethrowers, crude but devastating in tight formations or naval battles where a single burst could ignite sails or panic entire crews. But as gunpowder recipes improved, so did the lethality. By the 12th century, fire lances were loaded with porcelain shards, broken pottery, or even iron pellets, transforming them into crude shotguns that could shred flesh at 15 paces. Song dynasty manuals depict soldiers wielding them in phalanxes, their synchronized blasts cutting down charging cavalry like a scythe through wheat. The psychological impact was incalculable. For warriors accustomed to the predictable rhythms of swords and spears, the fire lance's sudden roar and blinding flash were the stuff of nightmares. Imagine standing in a Mongol horde, watching a line of Song infantry raise these smoking poles, then witnessing the front rank of your comrades vanish in a cloud of flame and spinning debris. No armor could fully deflect the heat or the hail of projectiles, and the noise alone was enough to spook horses into stampeding. Some variants even featured multiple barrels, allowing 2 or 3 bursts before the wielder had to resort to the spear tip. But the fire lance's true genius was its adaptability. It birthed an entire family of weapons: the eruptor, a handheld cannon that traded range for point-blank devastation; the nest of bees, a cart-mounted version that unleashed dozens of fire lances at once; and eventually the hand cannon, which discarded the spear altogether to focus purely on projectile force. These innovations didn't just change battles, they rewrote the rules of siege warfare. Fortresses designed to withstand years of catapults and battering rams suddenly had to contend with gates being blown inward by teams of fire lancers, their weapons piercing arrow slits to roast defenders alive in their own towers. Yet for all its brilliance, the fire lance was a fleeting revolution. By the 14th century, metal casting advances made standalone firearms more practical, and the hybrid design faded into obsolescence. But its legacy burned on. Every musket, every rifle, every rocket that followed owed a debt to this ungainly ancestor, proof that even the crudest tools can ignite the fires of change, especially when they literally set the world aflame. The kusarigama was more than just a weapon, it was a deadly paradox, blending the elegance of a sickle with the unpredictable fury of a weighted chain. Picture this: in one hand, a razor-sharp curved blade perfect for slashing; in the other, a long iron chain tipped with a heavy metal weight whirling through the air like a venomous serpent. Together, they formed a nightmare for any opponent, capable of striking from a distance one moment and slicing through flesh at close range the next. This wasn't just a tool for combat, it was a test of skill, demanding precision, timing, and nerves of steel from anyone bold enough to wield it. What set the kusarigama apart was its brutal versatility. The sickle could hook limbs, disarm foes, or deliver deep, slicing wounds, while the chain extended its reach, entangling weapons or crushing skulls with the weighted end. Ninja and samurai alike trained for years to master its fluid movements, launching the chain to snare an enemy's spear, yanking them off balance, then darting in with the sickle for a lethal finish. Historical scrolls depict fighters using the weapon to trip charging warriors, coil around sword arms, or even strangle opponents caught in its loops. The chain's sheer unpredictability made it a psychological weapon as much as a physical one. Enemies never knew whether to block high, dodge low, or brace for a sudden pull that would send them sprawling. Yet the kusarigama's deadliest strength was also its greatest weakness. One mistimed swing could send the chain recoiling back onto its wielder, leaving them tangled and vulnerable. Masters of the art practiced in near darkness to hone their reflexes, learning to listen to the chain's hum in midair. Some variants added spikes to the weight for extra penetration, while others featured shorter chains for tighter, controlled strikes indoors. The weapon thrived in ambushes and confined spaces, where its ability to strike around corners or from behind cover made it a favorite of shadow warriors and assassins. Its legacy endures in modern martial arts, where the kusarigama's principles live on in disciplines emphasizing fluidity and adaptability. To face one in battle was to confront chaos incarnate, a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous weapons aren't the strongest or the fastest, but the ones that turn every movement into a gamble. The garrote worked in silence, no clashing steel, no battle cries, just the slow, inexorable tightening of a wire or cord until life flickered out. This was assassination distilled to its most intimate and brutal form. A weapon that left no blood, required no great strength, and turned the human body against itself with terrifying efficiency. Unlike the flashy blades or explosive devices favored in stories, the garrote thrived in the shadows, its true power lying in its simplicity. A length of rope, a piano wire, even a soldier's own belt, anything that could loop around a throat became a tool for silent killing in the right hands. Its history slinks through the back alleys of empires. Roman assassins used linen strips to dispatch political rivals, their deaths disguised as natural collapses. Spanish executioners perfected the mechanical garrote, a chair fitted with a metal collar and screw, designed to slowly crush vertebrae while spectators watched. But the garrote's darkest legacy was written by spies. During World War II, British SOE operatives carried thin, flexible wire garrotes disguised as bootlaces, while Viet Cong assassins favored bicycle brake cables for their grip and durability. The weapon's beauty was its adaptability. No gunshots to betray a position, no dagger to leave behind as evidence. Just a corpse slumped in the dirt, its end as quiet as a sigh. What made the garrote uniquely horrifying wasn't just its stealth, but its intimacy. Unlike a sniper's bullet fired from a distance, strangulation demanded proximity. The killer felt every spasm, every futile claw at the wire, the victim's breath hot against their knuckles. Historical manuals for spies emphasize technique. One swift twist to collapse the trachea, or a sustained pull to induce unconsciousness first, depending on whether speed or silence mattered more. The garrote didn't just kill, it forced the wielder to participate in death, a tactile brutality that left psychological scars long after the act. Modern special forces still train with garrotes, though their materials have evolved. Carbon fiber wires won't snap under tension, and some variants incorporate handles for torque. But the principle remains unchanged. In a world of drones and smart bombs, sometimes the oldest tools are still the surest. The garrote's lesson endures true lethality, often wears no face, makes no sound, and leaves no trace except the absence of a breath. From the dragon's breath of Greek fire to the silent terror of the garrote, humanity's darkest ingenuity has always found its sharpest expression in the tools we forge for war. These 25 weapons didn't just change battles, they rewrote history, turning the tide of empires with every slash, burn, and bone-crushing impact. Whether it was the Sarissa's unbreakable wall of spears, the macuahuitl's obsidian teeth, or the H-Watcher's storm of fire, each of these inventions carried the same brutal message. Survival favored those who could outthink, outmaneuver, and out-terrify their enemies. But beyond the bloodshed, there's a grim fascination in how these weapons mirror the cultures that birthed them. The scimitar's elegant curve speaks of desert winds and horseback artistry, while the halberd's brutal efficiency reflects the pragmatic genius of Swiss mercenaries. Even the humble atlatl, a lever that defied physics, reminds us that innovation often springs from necessity, whether hunting mammoths or facing down armored knights. So which of these nightmares haunted your imagination the most? Was it the Kusarigama's whirling chain, the Falx's shield-splitting hook, or the Chu-Ko-Nu's relentless hail of bolts? Drop your picks in the comments. We'd love to hear what sent chills down your spine. And if you enjoyed this descent into the arsenal of history's deadliest tools of war, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Because the past is full of blades still sharp enough to cut through time, and we're just getting started. Until next time, stay curious, but maybe sleep with one eye open. Some of these weapons have a way of lingering in the dark.